Yeah, so I put myself on that, and I started researching ketogenic diets for epilepsy. I learned about oligoentogenic ketogenic diets, which I hadn't heard of before. It was this big name. And from that, I learned about why the ketogenic diet that I was on wasn't working for me. It's because I had this almost allergic response to certain foods that were traditionally ketogenic, and they ended up being mostly plant foods. So I stumbled upon being on a carnivorous ketogenic diet.
So on a very low level, it's still showing that I have this highly aggressive terminal cancer.
Okay, so Andrew, again, thank you very much for taking the time. Can you tell me about your diagnosis? What happened when you were first diagnosed?
Well, it's going back some time now. In 2012, I was suffering from quite a lot of migraines up until the point where a year later, to cut a long story short, I suffered a brain hemorrhage on a busy train and suddenly had to face lots of grand mal seizures, not knowing what was going on. And eventually I was diagnosed with a highly malignant, highly vascular brain tumor. Malignant brain tumor, yeah.
Okay, so that was back in 2012. So you've been fighting this for 12 years now. So what was the prognosis when you were first diagnosed then?
It was difficult to say initially because the tumor was so vascular and difficult to characterize. The first real diagnosis I had was of an anaplastic astrocytoma, which is a grade 3 brain tumor. With brain tumors, it's grades rather than stages, but means the same kind of thing in terms of aggressivity. It's grades because it's meaning that it doesn't usually escape the brain. It's primary brain cancer. So yeah, initially it was classed as grade 3. Under the new classification, because they change it every few years, it would be likely a grade 4, because now they take further, have more of an appreciation of the molecular characteristics of the tumor. So mine was, there's 2 different mutations they're looking at, which confer treatment sensitivity and your prognosis. And this is IDH1 and MGMT, which is a DNA repair protein. IDH1 it's an enzyme that's involved in the Krebs cycle, and that is dysregulated. So you get an accumulation of this product, which confers poorer prognosis. And I had that as being IDH1 wild type, which is the bad one. So I didn't have any preferential mutations. That I discovered all this on my own because I wasn't told a lot of this information, and I just wanted to know as much as possible. At this point, because I was having horrific seizures and I was very confused upon being told that I had this thing that I didn't really know much about, because I didn't know much about brain tumors at that point, I learned all these things about the treatment that I was being offered, and I'd just had an operation to remove most of the tumor. They couldn't remove all of it because there was residual disease in the motor cortex area of my brain. And if they tried to remove that, it would have been probably either instant death or certain paralysis down my right side. And so I'm quite thankful that that didn't happen. but you're then left with, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this scenario, that you still have disease left there, and it's in an area where, you know, it could, because it's so aggressive, you feel like you're living on borrowed time all the time, and like you have a ticking time bomb in your head. At this point, because I was having quite horrific seizures as a result of the hemorrhage and the tumor itself, I already had put myself on a very strict ketogenic diet because thankfully I'd actually learned about ketogenic diets just before my diagnosis. I was doing a master's in nutritional therapy, and this was 2012. And I'd learned about, I was trying to get to the bottom of why I was having these migraines. And I thought, well, I'd learn more about nutrition through doing this master's, and I'd find solutions. And I didn't have epilepsy at that point, but I learned about the ketogenic diet to treat drug-resistant epilepsy in children. And then what was even more controversial and quite surreal looking back at it is that we'd learned that there was some preliminary data on the ketogenic diet and certain ketogenic metabolic therapies, which is now a term in itself, but it wasn't then, to treat brain cancer. And this was, I felt this was absurd when I first heard about it, because I didn't know much about brain tumors, and it seemed overly simplistic. And it also was completely against everything I ever learned during my undergrad in nutrition at that point when I was doing this master's. So I was thinking, this diet high in saturated fat and cholesterol, that can't be a good thing. But I found it very interesting despite that. And I knew how it works in drug-resistant epilepsy in children with these specific genetic conditions whereby those glucose transporters in the brain are defective, and so they're able to bypass that by providing the brain predominantly with ketones, because the brains aren't able to use glucose properly for energy, and then they just have seizures as a result, because there's this hyperexcitability that you get with that glucose that's coming to the brain.
Yeah, it's kind of like overloading a circuit, you know. He's got too much power going through it. It just it throws a switch, you know.
That's a perfect analogy, I feel, as it's particularly in my case, and with traumatic brain injury, it feels like you've got exposed wiring. That's how I thought about my seizures and how I sought to mitigate that, because I noticed many triggers, and most of them were diet related. So I learned that quite early on. And so I learned from the literature, not just about ketogenic diets for, in my case, brain tumor related epilepsy, which there wasn't much on. I just learned in general how glucose and insulin can give this hyperexcitable effect to the neurons. And it's actually, with brain tumors, it's a good thing if you're constantly having seizures. Sounds like a strange thing to think about, but I had a type of MRI scan called it's MR spectroscopy, and it's looking at the biochemical changes of the tumor. So you're able to see the bioenergetic demands and see that, in my case, it was a highly glycolytic brain tumor.
Yeah.
And that was a good thing, because it actually means that the neurons are more healthy. If you often if you have advanced disease, you can have this necrotic tissue, and in brain cancer, it means that you might have quite severe seizures, but typically, if you don't have that, it's like a good thing. It's a more healthy state, because if you don't have that necrotic tissue, then the neurons are firing more like normal cells, and so you actually have more seizures as a result.
Yeah.
because it's kind of not dulled that effect. So
Yeah.
it's just, I found that interesting because I saw it as a good thing, but I saw it as a challenge to say, okay, if my brain is healthy enough to do something about it, even though I'm in this horrible situation and I'm having all these seizures that are causing this brain damage, because every time you have a seizure, these were grand mal seizures, you have more and more brain damage, and it makes the situation worse, and it can make the disease worse.
Yeah.
And so that was my predominant thought at that point in time. I was also very fortunate that Thomas Seyfried's book Cancer as a Metabolic Disease was released around that time. Yeah, I think it was end of 2012, beginning of 2013. And so I read that book. It's like a big textbook. And I learned about it it was weird. I learned about it in 2012. I learned about his work, and then I contacted him, and then I learned about the book, and I read the book. And this was in between having seizures. And so, I didn't believe any of the anti-cancer claims, which is kind of funny at the time. And I purposely put myself on, I didn't believe in it completely as a standalone treatment to just change your diet.
Yeah.
I thought there's something in this in terms of maybe slowing down growth. But then I wanted to do more, have more of a pressure on the cancer cells. So I purposely I had epilepsy, and I was looking at my anti-seizure drugs, and I purposely put myself on sodium valproate. I asked for that drug, and I pushed to have it because I knew it complemented a ketogenic diet quite favorably. It has this synergistic benefit. It's kind of partly it has a gut-brain affects the gut-brain axis and the vagus nerve. And so and I noticed that it had all these when I looked into the literature, and now it's like just a huge myriad of anti-cancer benefits that you get from this drug. I learned that at therapeutic doses, it readily crosses the blood-brain barrier at appreciable doses to have this anti-cancer effect for my specific type of brain tumor. And this is sodium valproate, the drug's called. It's actually a short chain fatty acid. It's valproic acid. And it's an active thing. It has this effect on the gut and the brain. So along with being an HDAC inhibitor and having all these other effects. But I'm probably going too deep into the weeds.
Great. I mean, it's very deep. I mean, it's a really steep learning curve though when you get diagnosed, and you sort of. I mean, I don't know about you, but I thought before I was diagnosed, I thought I was doing everything right, and according to my education and everything, all the literature around you at the time. But then you realize when it's this still happens to you anyway. It's like, well, okay, it's time to find out why. So you sort of have to go into all these sort of things. That drug is like short chain fatty acid. Is actually, I was reading a paper on that just recently, a few months back. They've actually published the benefits of short chain fatty acids actually fighting the growth of tumors as well. So really interesting stuff. Just brilliant.
Yeah, through various mechanisms. So
various mechanisms. But
really interesting.
While you're doing all this, what are your oncologists or what are your medical team thinking about this? Like, what were they thinking for your treatment?
Well, initially it was quite bleak, and I was given a very poor prognosis of just likely a couple of years, 2 to 5 years. And so, I've had a very negative oncologist who just wanted me to pursue this approach of having almost, initially chemoradiation and then almost endless cycles of temozolomide, which is the standard of care for a high-grade glioma. You have this 6.5 weeks of chemoradiation, and then you have monthly cycles of temozolomide. And I started to have that, but then towards the end, I thought, towards the end of that initial starting point, I decided to abandon it, because I didn't realize until I'd thought about it that because my tumor was not sensitive, or classed as not sensitive because of these molecular characteristics that we identified through the histopathology, I realized that I was on an unofficial, it was an official clinical trial that I wasn't really aware I was part of, to see. Essentially, I was the control group, because I was deemed as being someone who would be unresponsive to the treatment. And I didn't think about that properly until that point. And then I thought, well, what's the point in continuing? Because I'm just someone who's there as a human guinea pig for them to see what kind of response there is for a tumor that doesn't respond to these treatments.
That was exactly my position as well. I was exactly the same. Going through all these different cycles of treatment, and it's not responding. They decide to just keep going anyway, because they just want to see what happens,
This is actually the trial that I was a part of is called the Catnon trial. And so, you can look it up. It's not just me giving this anecdote. And it's just crazy how with that idea of that trial, you wouldn't want to be in the control group, because it's just what was expected. More or less happened. There was a marginal benefit, but it's not really worth the poor quality of life, and still a poor prognosis. So
I mean, you have to weigh up the quality of life as well. Some of these treatments that they give us are, like you said, of minimal benefit, if any. Some were, the clinical trial I was in, bendamustine, it actually did nothing towards the cancer itself, but it did give me a lot of other problems as well, like lifestyle-wise. It filled my arms with blood clots, for example, gave me fevers and all sorts of things, but they continued just to see what would happen. But the cancer itself was non-responsive, actually it grew throughout that period. But they just like to see what's going to happen. So they started the trial, and they just keep going. So you're just along for the ride when it's standard of care. It's kind of,
and I
always thought like that. You're a lab rat, basically.
And I was feeling worse during it, and I still had the enhancement on my scans. So it just seemed like something that wasn't worthwhile. And I was just, my seizures were worse. I was feeling horrible. And it's just, there's no point to that time. My mum actually around that time was also diagnosed with a different cancer that was caused by a medication she was taking. And so I began to lose trust in the medical establishment. And so, there was lots of thoughts going through my mind about how I effectively treat this or just live a better life. And so, I used myself as a human guinea pig in more proactive ways. And I sought to learn as much as I could about the brain and brain cancer, and then went back to studying once I'd resolved my seizure issues, largely with diet and high-dose Boswellia serrata. And I cycled things like melatonin.
So what was the protocol you used then?
So initially it was the valproic acid and a 4-to-1 ketogenic diet with fasting and magnesium and high dose Boswellia serrata.
Okay.
And then
so 4-to-1. What are you, fats to proteins?
Yeah, so it's what they use with drug-resistant epilepsy in children. It's 4 parts fat to 1 part protein and carbs.
Yeah.
And after a short while, I thought it's annoying counting the carbs part of that equation. And I also learned more about oligoantigenic ketogenic diets, which essentially is like it's this phenomena you get with certain types of epilepsy, whereby it's more like an allergic response to certain foods. So even some ketogenic foods can trigger seizures, even if your blood ketones are sufficiently to those levels that you would expect seizure freedom. And so I found this absolutely fascinating, and I realized for me that was certainly the case, that there were quite a few of these so-called ketogenic foods that would trigger a reflex epilepsy response, meaning that they were known triggers for this kind of phenomena that I was experiencing. And so once I'd gone on an elimination diet and cut out all of those foods, I experienced this profound freedom, and I managed to completely get off all of my anti-seizure drugs within the space of the course of 2 years by gradually weaning off and having higher doses of different forms of magnesium, particularly magnesium L-threonate, which gets to the brain readily.
Yeah.
And the reason I did that so carefully and thoughtfully, also with the melatonin, was because every time you come down and withdraw from the medication, because your brain gets used to it, any kind of change can trigger a withdrawal seizure. And so that was a horrible experience for me, because I was on the maximum dose of 2 different medications and I didn't have any help coming off those drugs. And it was a very frightening experience, let's say.
Yeah, I can understand. I mean, especially in your situation where you're having seizures, so coming off these drugs, be quite scary to think that.
Terrifying.
It'd be terrifying that, like, you might have another seizure and you don't know where you might be at the time either.
So I educated myself to work out what looks like a withdrawal seizure and what is a typical seizure that I was expecting.
Yeah.
And it was just a lot of reading and a lot of learning things that I wasn't told by my neurologist. And I went through quite a few neurologists and they couldn't help me. They wanted me to actually increase the medication, but I was already on the maximum dose. Yeah. And that was no life for me. It felt like I was a zombie all the time. And I developed these other kinds of seizures that when you're on the medication for a while, this is the types of feelings that you get. So you have your standard seizures that you experience, but then there's this other thing. And I only realized this was going on when I completely came off that medication.
Yeah.
And there's also this
other brain fog too, yeah. A brain fog from the medications that you're on. When you're on so many medications, I mean, apart from, there's other problems too, the deuterium level of medications that can do a lot of damage and bring diseases back as well. But you can't think clear enough about the situation that you're in until you're actually off the medications, Yeah. I had the same feeling like for years on this, so many medications, and half of the medications I was on was to, fight the symptoms or the side effects of the other medications,
And they also don't tell you, well, in my case, the neurologists don't communicate this to you, that the medications, when you're on them for a period of time, cause nutrient deficiencies.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't learned about that as well, it would have been even more difficult to come off the drugs. Because these nutrient deficiencies can actually, in the situation of having epilepsy, can make your seizure threshold lower. And so the remedy for that is they'll say, okay, we need to increase your medication or move you to a different one. And you could just remedy that by either supplementation or having a diet that's very nutrient dense. They don't tell you any of that.
No, that's right. Exactly. Not the same situation for me, obviously, but yeah, when certain medications weren't working, and I was the same, I was on maximum dose for many things, they simply say, well, you need, it's not working, so we can't give you more. We just have to, give you another type of drug that does the same thing. So like they're just they're like crabs, they're just moving sideways.
Yeah.
But nothing
else. Treat the side effects of that drug.
Yeah, just keep treating the side effects and don't worry about the cause. It's very frustrating. Very frustrating. You're trying to do your best to try and get some kind of a normal life back, and all you get is more medications, and just it's a very frustrating situation.
Yeah, there was a slight dilemma for me because I was on the sodium valproate, the brand name Epilim. There's a slight dilemma in that over time my scans improved. and after I'd abandoned the standard of care, and I was still on this drug, and I was in two minds as to whether to completely come off it or not.
Yeah.
But because I had this resolution on scans, I thought, okay, maybe it's fine to do that so long as I continue all of these other things. And I had hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and I was taking exogenous ketones of different forms in a way that I thought was very therapeutic, and boswellic acids, and doing all these things. And so, yeah, I thought that was enough, and seems like it's been enough because every year I get healthier and I'm doing more things. And like you, I'm very into being physically active, and so even in that respect, I've been improving every year.
That's fantastic. So now you've been fighting that for 12 years. That's just an amazing.
11, I'd say.
Yeah, but an amazing outcome so far. So do you have? Apart from diet, so basically now you are what people would say carnivore diet?
Well, I've gone back to a more, I guess they call it ketovore now.
Yeah, okay.
So there are quite a few plant foods I can tolerate now. So I have things like sauerkraut, I have avocado, which I couldn't tolerate before, which is very interesting. Macadamia nuts. I eat oily fish every day. I know some people would say, what about metal toxicity and all these things? But I have a huge battery of tests every 3 to 6 months. So I keep on top of all that, and everything looks fine. Another thing is I don't have gadolinium with my scans. Gadolinium is this rare earth metal that's used as a contrast dye with head and neck cancers and things like MS and other neurological conditions. So I don't have that because there's some evidence that it can accumulate in certain regions of the brain, particularly the globus pallidus and the dentate nucleus, which is more kind of central in the brain, but it controls things like fine motor control. And the reason I mention that is because we know now that even with healthy kidney function, this contrast agent is having this retention, and it's not tested for, but it's having these physiological effects, many of which we still don't properly understand. And there are these mechanisms that suggest that it's also not, it could also make cancers worse in the brain.
Yeah.
And so it's been found in brain tumor tissue. And so, that's one thing I avoid. In terms of my diet, it's mostly eggs, oily fish every day, fatty cuts of meat, usually lamb. Lamb's my preferred meat, and I tend to get high ketones with that.
Yeah.
I have
omega-3s as well. So lamb is really good for that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's high in omega-3, but in terms
it's higher than beef, but
comparatively,
comparatively.
I have cod liver as well, at least once a week or once every 2 weeks. Yeah, I think that's important because of the DHA.
Yeah. That's something I try to stress with people is you have to have a good range of fats. Not just, beef is not just it's not going to cut it. You can't just live on just beef sort of thing. You have to have a good range of fats. Oily fish is fantastic. You need your omega-3s and DHA and everything else like that too. So.
Yeah, and the cod liver, I think cod liver is really important. So it's not cod liver oil that I have, it's the actual cod liver. Yeah. And I just feel like, for people who do take the oil, I think, why not just eat the from the source? Why not eat the cod liver? Yeah. But that's how I think. It's always better
from the source. I must admit, I haven't done that actually. So I think on that recommendation, I'll give it a try.
Yeah, I definitely would. Another very ketogenic carnivore food, I don't like to label things like carnivore food, is sweetbreads, the thymus gland and the pancreas.
Okay.
Because it's very ketogenic. It's perfect ratios.
Okay.
And I have duck, so I don't have chicken, and I don't really have anything from pig unless I absolutely know the source. I'd prefer to have wild boar.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, anything monogastric, unless you know the source, what it's being fed, I steer clear of. That's something a lot of people don't think about. Is it's also about what your food is eating. What they have fed in monogastric animals will come out in what they produce, including the eggs, chicken eggs and things like that. So
I much prefer duck, and I feel as though duck is less mass produced, so there's less that could go wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, hopefully. Bigger eggs too. So
I think the eggs in duck have more DHA as well. So
I didn't know that. But they're bigger, so they're good.
Yeah,
if you can get them anyway.
They can be quite better source.
Yeah, it depends on where you are and what you're doing. You mentioned Professor Seyfried, and you've been talking. I spoke to Professor Seyfried last year. Actually, he's such a great guy, and his research. What now? Your team, your original team, are you still in contact with your oncologist? What did they think of your situation?
Once I went off and did my own thing, I changed my oncologist to one at Charing Cross Hospital in London. That his research team at Imperial College London focuses on metabolic therapies and ketogenic diets. And
wow, that's great.
Yeah, I found them through a ketogenic diet conference in 2014, and that was with a charity called Matthew's Friends, the UK version of the Charlie Foundation.
Yeah.
So it's mainly they were mainly seeing people with epilepsy. However, over time, they were able to branch out to seeing brain tumor patients and saying that they were treating the symptoms, because so many of these people have epilepsy as a result. And so you have that bridge to be able to investigate cancer through epilepsy, which is also how Thomas Seyfried's work came about. He was initially looking at epilepsy, and it provides the perfect bridge to looking at brain cancer. And so, I had the same kind of introduction to it, I suppose you could say.
Yeah. With a bit more motivation, perhaps.
Yeah, that helps. Exactly. It's people often ask if I find this way of eating difficult, and actually the freedom it gives me in the way that it makes me feel makes it no effort at all, really. I associate those other foods as being well, I don't class them as foods really anyway, most of them.
Yeah.
But I just see them as provoking seizures and making things worse. So it's quite easy to stay off them. And also I find the foods that I eat extremely delicious. So it's not really much of a hardship to...
Not really, is it? I mean, apart from that, like, it is really, like, I mean, it's great, it tastes great and everything like that. But, people ask you, like, how, why it's such a restrictive diet. I was, well, it's not as restrictive as being stuck in bed. It's not as restrictive as being on treatments and things like that. There's no restriction at all, because it's really just about giving me the nutrients I need to live a life. To go out and do things so that I'm not restricted.
Well, from a nutrient standpoint, it's not restrictive at all, because it's the opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not giving your body anything it doesn't need.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Whereas before, I think my diet was far more restrictive in that respect before, because I wasn't getting enough fats, I wasn't getting enough nutrients. So, there's if you look at it that way, it's very different.
I was on a pescatarian diet before my diagnosis. Yeah, and I thought that was the best diet to be on.
I was very much saying working in the fitness industry, and it's all about low fat, skinless chicken breast, and get your rice and vegetables and that sort of stuff. So
it's getting a lot better. In 2012 it still wasn't great, but we had things like the paleo diet, which was getting popular, and I thought that was very interesting. It's kind of not a thing anymore, but if you remember back then, paleo diet was the thing, and then it died off when keto came about, and then keto's kind of died off a bit, and you have these other ways of eating which are...
Well, they get taken over too. They get they start off great, but they always get taken over by the big food industry, and they start having these paleo treats and there's keto treats, and so you just have like a ultra processed version of because it's low carb. Everyone thinks it's good to eat. It's keto friendly. It's paleo friendly.
Even salts now. You have this scandal about the salts, and I just feel like I make my own electrolytes at home. It's not that difficult.
No, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I've never supplemented with that myself. I just use a good quality mineral salt, and that's helped me quite a bit. So I mean, it's the same thing. These ultra processed companies just to sort of worm their way in, and whenever they find something that's profitable, they will try and convince us all that it's keto friendly. It's so and so. But I've seen crazy things like people saying like keto friendly ice cream. It's full of seed oils, but it's low in carbs. It's just but it is what it is, I guess, and people will follow it. It's just anyway. But I think that's one good thing about this carnivore. For me, it's just, I think it's just been, it's the diet I need to try and stay in remission and keep a quality of life sort of thing. But I think this carnivore movement is far more sustainable, hopefully, than because you don't get these carnivore treats so much at the moment. Hopefully, it won't worm its way in anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Do you?
yeah.
I see it. I see it with a few things, but not many. Do you? Do you supplement with glycine at all, or make sure to have a lot of connective tissue in these kinds of things to balance out the methionine?
I when it comes to, I do eat a very high fat, and I eat the whole thing. I don't when it's connective tissue and things like that, but I don't actually supplement with
that because high methionine is supposedly linked to early aging and problem and being more of an issue with cancer. And so to balance it out, you have more of the glycine, and then it's not an issue. So yeah, that's why I mentioned it, because I often, if I don't have lots of connective tissue, I make sure to supplement with glycine, and I just feel like it's important. But I do restrict as well. So I do restrict. I still restrict to a point. I don't follow like a really high protein diet, but at the same time, I have a lot more protein than I did when I was on the 4-to-1 ketogenic diet, because I do so much exercise now. It would be ridiculous. It wouldn't be good for me to not have that. And I do intermittent fasting and these things.
Yeah, I think that's an adaptive thing too. Your fat intake and protein intake, obviously, your body needs time to adapt to these sorts of things. But and obviously, the more exercise you do, the more protein you're going to need as well.
Yeah.
But it's kind of difficult when you're going through treatments. So you have to, But again, it's all an experiment that you have to work on. What's going to work best for you, sort of thing. That we all need to play around with. Unfortunately, it's just there's no one size fits all. So, what have you been doing since your diagnosis? Since since you've weaned yourself off medications, everything's. Is it still there? Are you still?
I've been in a state of complete remission since that point.
Oh,
and
that's
so,
fantastic.
And now I don't actually tend to have MRI scans often. I'm kind of going on to more this liquid biopsy modality. So yeah, I have liquid biopsies instead, which is you just have a blood test which you can identify if there are any cancer cells still around, circulating tumor cells. And at first, these types of tests weren't sophisticated enough for brain cancer, so you couldn't actually detect it because you've got the blood-brain barrier, and that's supposed to stop anything going into or out of the brain. So you couldn't really reliably detect circulating tumor cells from the brain that would indicate it's a glioma as reliably as you can now. So now we're able to detect not only in the blood for even identifying what type of brain tumor it is, and the whole histopathology just from that. You can detect it in the urine now as well. So they've developed these urine tests for brain cancer. And it's interesting as well, because say if the tumor is actually dying off and you're detecting that, you might think, oh, there's an abundance of all these this kind of debris, let's say. But actually it's a good thing, because the tumor's dying off and it's just going through the circulation to then be, to be gotten rid of. but then you would pair it with some type of scanning. But what you can do, which is very interesting from these tests, which I'm experimenting on at the moment because it's not actually indicated for my specific situation, is I'm using these liquid biopsies to firstly to identify what's there. I've already done that. So on a very low level, it's still showing that I have this highly aggressive terminal cancer, which is interesting in itself because it shows that I've kept it at bay for this period of time. And also I wanted to retest what it was because, you know, you might get the common person saying, okay, maybe this was like a misdiagnosis. And so I've had it retested many times, the tissue, and it's actually come up as being worse than I initially thought. So that's interesting. But because it's been so long, that's a good thing because it shows that, yeah, it's still this aggressive disease, but it's been kept away, and potentially I could just die with it from at an old age rather than die of it, but it would still be there at a very low level. But I am trying to be ambitious and to get rid of it completely. And there's 3 kinds of tests that you can take with this. Sound like I'm selling it. One is to identify what's there and to give you the genetic profile, which you can compare against the original tumor, which is interesting itself. Secondly, you can see what how aggressive it is. This would be classed as the proliferative index usually. So if you have the histopathology report, which I think every patient should have access to, they should have this printed out and sent to them. You have this thing called the proliferative index, or Ki index, and that indicates how quickly the cells are dividing. It's also called the mitotic index. So you can see how aggressive the cells are.
Yeah.
And so you can do that through this test as well. The other thing you can do with the third test is you can identify what non-toxic treatments could be effective. And that's a new thing that I'm exploring that hasn't been explored yet.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's phenomenal. It's really good to see these new tests. I mean, I've seen these liquid tests done before, and they're kind of still a new thing here in Australia. But it's great to see they're avoiding things like PET scans and MRIs and things like that.
And invasive biopsies. Yeah. Traditional biopsies, you're causing this inflammatory response, and I think it's called chemotaxis, where you have that kind of spread of the cancer cells and the chemokines and all these things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, they're still, as far as I know, they're still doing mechanical biopsies here. They did on the main tumor I had wrapped around my aorta. Was a long, it's quite a painful biopsy actually, because they had to put a very long needle into my abdomen to go into the tumor, and then take the biopsy. Which
it's like poking a bee's nest.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly what it's doing. They're poking the bee's nest. After that, it just sort of explodes everywhere. I was saying before, they don't tell you about these things, and I think largely they just don't know. They're not. Like my oncologist team, and I mean all the doctors. I mean, they're all pretty good people. Generally speaking, 99% of I think of the hospital staff are great. They just don't know how to, treat the causes, how to really attack it. I think, and they're just trained to treat their symptoms. Unfortunately,
Thankfully, here it's getting better. There are a few that are on board with this and interested. My oncologist is really good.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's fantastic that you have an institute there that is just like that. I haven't heard anything really much. I mean, there's a lot of good doctors speaking out about this sort of thing here in Australia, but we don't actually have anywhere you can actually go and get treatment like that.
Yeah. Well, it's the same here. You can't actually. I guess they also have their hands tied. They're not really allowed to do that, even if they wanted to. Yeah. So it's more that they're open to it and supportive, but they can't actually. Yeah, they still can't really do anything, which must be horrible.
Yeah, I mean they're in the system as well, the same as we are, the same as the patient. You know, even when I was being, or even when I was going through getting through medications, like my oncologist would actually have to clear it with an accountant before he could prescribe it for me. You know. Like every time I'll give you this script, but hang on a second, I just have to call the accountant and make sure I'm allowed to do this. It's insane.
What a situation, yeah.
So how is this? I mean, obviously it affects everyone. How has this affected your life now? Is it? I mean, you're obviously on a different path to where you were.
Yeah. It's given me so much meaning.
Yeah.
And the appreciation for life. And I suppose over the past couple of years, I've embraced that fully, which that's a fairly new thing. I was, well, to go back a bit, after I got off all of the anti-seizure drugs, I went back to studying. And I focused on cancer biology.
Yeah. Because
I wanted to get involved and I wanted to have more of a voice. And through that, the New Scientist magazine got hold of my story, found it very interesting, what I was doing. And I managed to have a major article in there about my diet and my research and everything that I was doing at that point in time and where I was progressing to. And now I'm doing a PhD, which is focused on brain tumors. And I'm doing a lot of work with the Forever Young group at the University of Westminster. Last year, actually, we mentioned a few times Tom Seyfried. I published a paper with him around this time last year, actually. Which was on an all-female cohort that it was with my colleague Isabella Cooper. And yeah, she has an amazing group that I work with from time to time. And yeah, that was an all-female cohort, which in itself is unusual. But that forms like a control group for the cancer work that we're set to do. And I'm also doing a study on ketone esters for non-communicable diseases. Yeah. And I'm doing an N of 1 using, I'll show you what I'm using. So I have this very pure ketone ester that I'm testing at the moment.
Okay.
And that'll be a 6-month test on myself, and then I'm just writing everything up. And I'm doing it partly as a performance aid and partly to just see what impact it may or may not have metabolically through different blood tests and anthropometric measures. Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting test.
How has it made you feel so far?
Just very wired, and I tend to be very productive. I've noticed more of the neurological benefits than the physiological so far.
Okay.
Because yeah, I've already reached quite well, for me, a relatively high level in endurance running. So yeah. I do a lot of running, which initially I thought that would be an unhealthy thing to do. I
Yeah.
I still think it's relatively. It's not the best thing you can do.
Yeah, well, I mean, as a strength coach, I've read several articles that come out of Europe or different parts of Europe that, the more cardiovascular long distance sort of training that you do, the faster it ages your brain, actually ages you. So I mean, it's pretty convincing. But honestly, I've done a lot of marathons and triathlons and things like that too. So
I think if you're in a state of ketosis already, and if you're keto adapted, it's different.
I think it would be too, because I think all of those athletes were all carb addicted.
Exactly.
So
they're having like gels constantly.
Yeah, that's right. They'd be carbo-loading. They'd be doing all sorts of things. So I think that would have been probably the aging effect would have come from the carbohydrate intake, because there would have been a very high carbohydrate diet. Especially at the time, was always carbo loading, things like that. So
yeah. And I find I get to that kind of state whereby I feel like I would need like a top up of ketones, because it's still a finite energy source, even though it's highly efficient and lasts a long time. And so that's where I find the ketone esters help. And it's not a salt, so it's a very pure product. Doesn't have any additives. It's just the straight up, BHB.
So when will that be available?
It's available now. Just if you search for original ketone, yeah. Still quite expensive though. It's a relatively new product.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've spoken to so many people that have, their whole life has changed. But this says, I think for me, myself as well, I think it gives us a new mission in life to try and, I think the universe has a funny way of sort of taking us to where we should be, like putting us where we should be, sort of thing. And, showing a path that we should be following, sort of thing. And I think, for you, obviously, you have a remarkable story. Now you're doing a PhD in cancer biology, and it's just an incredible story. It really is. And do you think that you sort of had to go through this to sort of put you on your path as well?
At the time, I didn't think that, but I do now. Yeah. If you'd asked me after my diagnosis, I'd say, no, definitely not. But yeah, absolutely. I didn't really know where I was going before, even though I kind of enjoyed what I was doing. I was a personal trainer before I went back to studying nutrition. Yeah. And I thought that was my path. But for me, because I'm naturally quite introverted, and I had some insecurities and I was overly stressed, that probably wasn't helpful for me. And so this actually has been quite a blessing, because I feel like it's been a real strength, and I'm able to help people, and I enjoy it too. And I'm thinking more about myself as well. It's not just thinking about a career and thinking about cancer all the time. I'm thinking about my happiness and what makes me feel content. And there was a time not long ago where I was thinking about my career too much, and I lived in London and it wasn't nice. And now I live on the South Coast and I really enjoy it. I started to go to London for research and work things, but when I go, it's as a visitor. I don't live there. I'm not surrounded by all of this stress and all these people and all the VOCs in the air, volatile organic compounds, that we can associate with brain tumors, which it's these kind of things. We have all these exposures, not just toxic exposures from other people. which is a thing, but also in the air we breathe, in the water, in the food. So
yeah, it's absolutely everywhere.
I feel like where I live now, because it's very green and it's by the coast, you can't get away from it completely because of the nature of what we're exposed to.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm doing a pretty good job here, and I notice it in my health.
I mean, like you were just talking about there, do you have any other lifestyle hacks that you implement that helps you?
I'd say I'm very mindful with everything that I do.
Okay.
Even if I'm eating, it's very slow and deliberate.
Yeah.
And I'll go for a walk after I eat, because if I just sit and do nothing, I feel like not only am I not metabolizing the food properly, but it just mentally feels better doing that. And I think it's a natural thing. So yeah, I do a lot of walking. I have red lights at home. So in the evenings, I don't have these hyper intense bulbs. I feel like that's important. Sometimes I'll have candlelight because I just like it. It feels good. House plants. I feel like people don't realize that in this part of the world, when we're entering winter, people stay inside a lot, and you have this thing called sick building syndrome, whereby you have these, even if you're not using cleaning products that are, have these carcinogens and unhelpful components, you can have, say, for example, you could be in an area of the country, wherever you are, that has that could be a high radon area. So in the ground, you have this odorless, colorless gas that can accumulate, and if you don't have windows open, it can just stay in the house and you don't realize. Things like that. And just air quality, people don't think about enough, I think, either indoors or outdoors.
Yeah.
So, I think about all these things. I've looked at cancer clusters a lot. I have a podcast series, which I'm kind of lazy with, but I covered a cancer cluster in the US. They keep good data in the US on cancer clusters.
Okay.
And you can learn a lot from them. So I try to not have those exposures. Sleep is a huge thing. I prioritize sleep a lot.
Yeah.
So I have a routine before I go to bed. I don't eat too close to bedtime. I feel like that's really important. I don't have caffeine because I can't, but I probably wouldn't anyway. I don't have, it sounds like a crude thing to say, but I don't have pornography and these kinds of things because I know it messes up my brain. It's kind of like this idea of the dopamine fast,
Yeah.
I feel like before my diagnosis, I was too wired and just too, relying on stimulants and these rewards, not food,
exactly
but other things. And now I'm much calmer. I don't rely on that. And so, it's just things like that. And getting out first thing in the morning, watching the sun rise, watching the sunset in the evening.
Yeah.
Simple things, but they make a huge difference. Grounding.
They do. Grounding is fantastic. I like everything like that. Like being trapped inside, it's depressing because you're not getting that natural red light from the sun, things like that. Yeah. But it's, I think it's hardwired in us to be outside. We have to be outside and enjoy the sunlight, the grounding, the sunlight, and just to be doing something. I like gardening is a great exercise.
Good for your microbiome as well, to have that interaction with the soil.
Yeah, Yeah, that's right.
'Cause I tried to do that in London, but in London they have even though there are lots of green spaces, they're regularly sprayed with all of these herbicides.
Yeah.
And it's really bad. And they tell you don't worry because it's at safe levels. But
it's not. I mean, it's not going to kill you that day, so it's safe levels, you know.
So I tried to go to lots of places with quite wild foliage. You know, I like that, and being by a body of water, I find for me really helps. I feel like humans are supposed to be by a large body of water.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I love the water. I just, I love swimming. Swimming is it's always been a sport that I love. I've always enjoyed. But being in the ocean itself, being in the salt water, it's so much more beneficial than just being in a swimming pool. You know, live. Yeah, I think you have to try. It's very difficult in this day and age, but you have to try and live as natural a life as possible in this very unnatural world. Like you're saying, like chemicals, and there's only so far you can go to avoid all of this. But it's only a few simple steps, really. Like grounding, being outside, try to get away from built up areas as much as possible,
and being around people. Being around positive people who share your values.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
it's a very difficult thing.
The people you hang around, or the people you surround yourself with, is who you become.
Yeah.
So toxic people can be just as bad as toxins. So these are things that people need to sort of be wary of as well, especially if things the whole world is going through stages at the moment where there's a lot of negative sort of things happening. But if you can do these sorts of things, you can see the positive outcomes coming. You can see the positive side of things. It really helps. And there are stresses.
There's a lot of positivity. Like what we're doing now is very positive,
Exactly. See, this is what we're doing now is part of the changes that hopefully is going to help a lot of people with or hopefully avoid our situations.
Well, we have these communities now, and I'm thankful for you for doing what you do, because it's impactful and it's important, because
hopefully
getting people together and having conversations and sharing information, and we do it primarily because we care, and
that's right. Yeah,
that's a lovely thing.
It is a positive thing. It's a really good thing that people share their experiences, because that's ultimately how people learn as well. We learn from other people's experiences. We learn from our own experiences. What advice would you give people who have perhaps a bad diagnosis, or just want to avoid it?
Well, firstly, don't be too hard on yourself, because we generally tend to be that way.
Yeah.
And secondly, if it's a cancer diagnosis, think about what could have been out of balance to cause that diagnosis.
Yeah.
Just really be reflective and think, what could I've been exposed to, or what could it sounds horrible, but what could I've done to cause this situation? Because we don't like to think that. We like to think it's just bad luck, but it's not necessarily you. It could be something you've been exposed to. But just thinking about what could be out of balance to cause that, and then seeking solutions to managing that. For me, it was the book Cancer as a Metabolic Disease that helped me, and the Metabolic Approach to Cancer by Dr. Neisha Winters. Those books really helped.
Great too, yeah. She actually has Neisha Winters. She also has the Metabolic Terrain Institute of Cancer, I think it is.
Yeah.
Health. Yeah, they do a great podcast at the moment too on YouTube.
Yeah, she's incredible.
Yeah, she does great work.
Yeah, it's mainly I always think practically. So from that standpoint, yeah, that's what I would advise. But also just not being too hard on yourself, seeking knowledge, but seeking that appreciation of life and not being too hard on yourself and appreciating life and others around you.
Yeah, I agree. Finding balance, that's great advice. Like we were saying before, trying to live as natural a life as possible. You need that balance.
Change your environment if you have to. I know it's hard, but if you're in a stressful workplace, change your job. If you're in a place that's got lots of pollution and stress, move. These things are important. I know it could be difficult, but or if you have a situation where you have to stay up at night and get poor sleep, or you say you work a night shift, or you have commitments where you need to be up late at night, that's not going to help you.
No, that's right.
Circadian biology is very powerful. So first thing is always to sort your sleep out. You can be on the best diet in the world, but if you have this circadian mismatch, it's pointless. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I know what it's like to work night shift. I worked nights for a number of years myself. It's I think it's just a situation that especially if you are in a situation like we were, you need to change that situation. It is difficult. I know, I understand that, but how much is your life worth?
Exactly.
So
sometimes you have to go cold turkey. You can't just go bit by bit.
Yeah, that's right.
It's hard, but you have to get through it.
Yeah, it can be very difficult especially if you are in a situation where, like we were. It's already very far gone. You don't have a time. You don't have the luxury of time to transition. So going cold turkey may be the only answer. Yeah. So these are things that may need to consider. And like I said, how much is your life worth? Is it worth your job? Is it worth the place you're living at the moment? So these things all come back to you, and like the same with Andrew, it's put him on a new path for his life, and you might find that a change of direction. This is something I stress to people a lot: is it doesn't matter where you are at in life, you can always change direction, and it can be difficult, it can be violent at times, but it is possible. Andrew, thank you again for taking the time. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
I find your story phenomenal, actually. It's very inspiring. And I think, the more people should know, more people should know that, stories like this exist. People can take control of their health, and they can take control of their treatments, and they can, and there's always an element of risk. There's always an element of risk, whether you go standard of care or you take it into your own hands like you did. But, and ultimately you are the one that live with the consequences, So it's a decision everyone should make for themselves, I think.